Hey folks, I hadn't planned on speaking out, but with the election less than a day away, I felt it's the right time to share my thoughts. Many of you are still undecided or perhaps feeling lost, and I get it. For almost 8 decades, politicians on both sides have cheated us. But here's the thing. Should all the blame fall on them? After all, they didn't point a gun at your head and force you to vote for them, right? So we're partly responsible for this mess because, election after election, we sent them to that fisheries department, of course. Apologies for the real fishermen out there. I didn't mean them at Lake Deawana. My question is, why? Why didn't we think? Let me give you an example. Imagine you're walking and accidentally fall into a huge puddle. After some effort, you get out and continue your journey. The next day, if you take the same route, you'd naturally avoid the puddle, right? That's basic human instinct. Another example. If a burglar breaks into your home, what do you do to stop him from coming back? You'd take extra precautions, padlocks, a CCTV system, maybe even an insurance plan. These are natural decisions. So why haven't we acted similarly when choosing our representatives for parliament? There are reasons for this, and I'll explain them one by one. Understanding these reasons is crucial because they are at the heart of the country's crisis, whether it's economic, social, or cultural. In no particular order, here are the reasons. Understanding what's really happening. Although Sri Lanka ranks 67th in the world for proficiency rates, the majority of Sri Lankans struggle with analytical skills. This means they find it difficult to compare facts and figures or analyze situations and come to a clear conclusion. Now, apply this to voting. For 7 decades, people have been electing the same politicians. Except for a handful, most of these politicians haven't achieved anything significant. Yet voters still chose them, often vaguely and without much scrutiny. The power of the subconscious mind. What does the subconscious mind have to do with elections? Surprisingly, a lot. But first, let's briefly look at how it works. The subconscious mind is a complex part of our brain that affects our thoughts, emotions, and actions. It controls automatic processes and stores information we're not actively focusing on, like memories and emotions. When people say, "This time a change must happen," and then, in the same breath, consider voting for the SJB or Ranil, the independent candidate, well and truly, they both are the same anyway. You see the contradiction. They claim they want change, but they still default to the conventional two parties. Why? Because their choices are deeply ingrained in their subconscious mind. Even when they recognize that the country has been in development for 76 years, they still fail to break the cycle. They know their politicians have stolen from them, yet their subconscious mind denies it. That's why they keep re-electing the same corrupt individuals as their governors. Becoming the norm and accepting the status quo. About half a century ago, when I was born, Sri Lanka was a developing country. And today, it's still developing. Despite being rich in resources compared to our neighboring countries, nothing has really improved, aside from a few highways financed by loans with crippling interest rates, further increasing the debt burden on the poor. You see, when things happen repeatedly over time, you tend to adopt them without realizing it. Corruption becomes part of your day-to-day life, something you no longer think twice about. Your leaders rob the nation's wealth, and you've lost the moral ground to challenge it. You probably think, so what? Everyone's the same. This mindset becomes ingrained in society. What most people haven't realized is that while Sri Lanka remains stuck, our neighboring countries have massively progressed. Corruption and the development of the economy, social status, and political landscape are negatively correlated. When corruption is high, development suffers, and vice versa. No wonder why she hasn't developed then. Sadly, the majority of Sri Lankans dwell in this situation, indifferent to where the country is heading. They've convinced themselves that this is their fate or karma. But this is not fate or karma, it's ignorance. It's the result of getting used to the consequences of corrupt rulers who rob the country day and night, while citizens turn a blind eye to their filthy activities. Slave nation. Both main political parties operate under the impression that, apart from their elite members, the rest of the ordinary citizens are their slaves, people who should not actively participate in politics. Let me give you a classic example. Over the years, hundreds of political parties have been formed in Sri Lanka, but almost all of them have been hijacked by the two dominant parties. The only party that has resisted this trap is the JVP, now the NPP. This autonomy from the two main parties has long been a stumbling block for people who want to establish a true opposition against exploitation and mistreatment. And this struggle continues even today. Now you have a duty to free yourself from this trap and seek out alternatives. Don't be enslaved by the status quo. Be free, think for yourself, and choose leaders who truly represent the people's interests. Me and not the country. For years, the majority of people have been thinking about me and my family. In other words, you're asking, what's in it for me? Correct me if I'm wrong, but every election you've likely chosen your candidate or party based on what you personally hope to gain, right? In the short term, this might seem reasonable, but the politicians know your attitude all too well. That's why, in the lead up to elections, they visit you with small perks, sometimes worth less than 1,000 rupees in today's terms. But once the dust settles, they forget about you until the next election. This bribery scandal has been part of Sri Lanka's election system for decades. The result? The upper, and even some lower tiers of the two main political parties have consumed more than 70% of the nation's income. I don't need to explain what that's done to our economy. Remember, the country is in crisis today, in part because of your indirect actions. But this time, things are different. You're determined to change this system, and for the first time in election history, your vote will be meaningful. Because this time, you'll vote for the benefit of 22 million people, including yourself. All right, that brings me to the conclusion. The right to vote is democracy, but choosing the right candidate is wisdom. Apologies to those planning to vote for swindlers. You need to rewire your brains. The fundamental issue in Sri Lanka is corruption, backed by a law enforcement system controlled by the establishment. Get rid of the swindlers, implement a proper legal framework, and the rest will fall into place. As I see it, there are three parties responsible for the current state of the country. First, the politicians and their senior administration. Second, the religious sector. And third, the people who keep voting for these dodgy politicians. The upcoming presidential election is not just another election, it's your future in every sense. I know many of you have your favorite candidates, but before you cast your vote, take a moment to think and rethink. What has that individual done in the past? What are they doing now? And what are they capable of doing in the future? It's not rocket science to figure this out if you're in the right frame of mind. Here's what to consider. Facts and figures. Analyze them. Look at the candidate's team. Are they involved in corruption? Wealth acquisition. How have they acquired their wealth? Do they bribe voters, no matter how big or small? Cronyism and nepotism. Is this part of their track record? Campaign behavior. Do they mudslinging, scaremonger, or attack opponents? Are they using the media inappropriately? Remember the snake in a Coca-Cola bottle? Rings a bell? Last-minute propaganda. Be ready for texts and WhatsApp messages spreading false propaganda. Just delete them. These perpetrators will be prosecuted right after the election. Just remember, even the incumbent de facto president is not allowed to use the mainstream media during the restriction times, no matter what. This election isn't just about today. It's about changing the future for generations to come. You've suffered for over 7 decades, and now is the time to end this painful, horrible era. Embrace this moment without hesitation. Choosing the right leader. All three main candidates have been in politics for some time, so you've seen and heard enough to make up your mind. To help, here are a few key leadership qualities to look for. Integrity. Have they lied in the past? If so, they'll likely do it again. Corruption. Have they engaged in financial crimes like money laundering or insider trading like the CB bond scam? Accountability. Do they own up to their mistakes, or do they blame others? Curiosity. Is their vision broad, or is it limited to their friends and relatives? Resilience. How quickly can they recover from setbacks? Communication. Is their messaging clear or vague and childish? Courage. Do they face their opponents publicly, or hide away? You probably remember some leaders never turned up for the debates. Respect for law. Do they believe no one is above the law, or do they abuse their social or political status? If a candidate lacks these qualities, don't choose them. It's encouraging to see that many citizens, particularly those in the middle income class, are self-driven and refuse to be bribed by corrupt politicians. This class despises corruption and is driving the party that's leading in this election. A great sign for the future of Sri Lanka. A final word. 3 cheers for the extraordinary protest and for being part of this movement. You can smile knowing you're participating in a historic moment. Failing to do so will only leave you with regret. I'm not asking you to subscribe to my channel. I'm not a regular vlogger, but I'd appreciate it if you could share this message with your colleagues and friends. Together, we can be part of history. 7 decades of suffering is finally coming to an end. Welcome to a bold and beautiful new Sri Lanka. Here's my final touch. For more than 70 years, since gaining independence from Britain, so-called swindlers have gradually robbed you of your wealth. Every 5 years, you've indirectly supported the election of these 2 main establishments. They've treated you like slaves, making you suffer all this time. If that's not enough for you, go ahead. Vote for them again and continue suffering forever. But if you want real change, choose the one and only genuine movement, which everyone's talking about, and transform the system once and for all. The choice is yours. Be part of this historic moment and welcome a bold, beautiful, brand new Sri Lanka. Remember, on the September 22nd, 2024, you will awaken to a clean and fresh Sri Lanka. Make sure to be part of this history-making event. If not, you will regret it forever. Good luck tomorrow. Enjoy witnessing this historical moment.